Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded from the Old Rock House in St. Louis, Missouri, here's your host, Aaron Perlut.
Hey there, and welcome back to the final episode of Season 4 of the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlut, and today we have a very special guest who you may recognize from either The Voice, American Idol, or your favorite streaming platform. He is Caleb Lee Hutchinson, and he has his first full-length album dropping right now. Caleb, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Quite the intro.
You know, I want to get to the record because it has a real unique sound in that it reminded me of some non-traditional music that's been produced by people like Cauthen and Sturgill Simpson over the last few years. But, I really want to start, though, with kind of you. I'm always interested in where people come from. I know you're from Georgia, but, the kind of their introduction to music and their influences. Most people that we talk to, they came up, with music in their house or maybe in church or school. Where were you kind of introduced to music, and when did it become really part of your soul?
Yeah, man. Music was kind of always present in my life. I wasn't related to anybody who actually played music. Like my dad had a guitar and knew a few chords, but I wasn't surrounded by people who played, and but they were all just massive fans. So kind of from all angles as a kid, I had everyone in my family trying to show me what the good stuff was. I think ultimately my dad probably beat out everybody else because I used to and still do think my dad's the coolest person ever. So I've talked about it a few times. He used to have this truck with a cassette player in it, and he would kind of just show me stuff. And that's really where I remember forming the biggest interest and connection with music. He would show me John Prine records, and I fell in love with John Prine super young. He would show me Mississippi John Hurt. A memory I can't get out of my mind was my dad was showing me Mississippi John Hurt and showing me all this Delta blues stuff. And I was maybe 4 or 5, and he's like, "How many people do you think are playing the guitar out there?" I'm listening, and I'm like, 2 or 3. And he's like, "That's one guy." I was like, "What?" And it just kind of blew my mind that there was that many different styles of music. My mom was into 80s hair metal and 90s country. My dad was kind of under the impression that country music died in 1985 and everything after it isn't worth anything. So I had all these different, people showing me all this different stuff. My great uncle, who bought me my first guitar, and probably the main reason I'm doing any of this, he got me into punk, but he also got me into the Chili Peppers, all over the place. I was the coolest kid in elementary school, who just wanted to be like Mick Jagger.
Well, I gotta admit, though, I'm sure your dad and I are probably a similar age, and I would agree with you. He is one of the coolest guys ever, based on what you've told me.
Yeah.
But he was probably right until Chris Stapleton reminded us what country music could sound like potentially.
Yeah.
There's very few people like Chris Stapleton out there.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of been in the long term, the cool thing with my dad is, as he's gotten older and I've gotten older, now I've gotten to show him all the Tyler Childers and Sturgill Simpsons and Paul Cauthens and Cody Jinks and all these people. I think I was in middle school when I first found Jamie Johnson.
Yeah.
And I remember going home and showing my dad, being it's not over. This is still going on.
They might not be on country radio outside of maybe Sirius XM or something like that, but it's definitely not over today.
Yeah. Well, as a kid, I listened to country radio, and I had no problem with it. I really enjoyed the stuff going on. I got to grow up with it, but I definitely noticed the difference between Waylon Jennings and Luke Bryan. So it's not even that I was dogging on the new stuff or anything like that. I just noticed the change. And, as a kid, I was acting like I grew up in the 70s and was like, no, this, I don't know about this stuff. Like, it's good, but it ain't the real stuff. And I think as I've gotten older, I've got more of an appreciation for everything. Because if someone likes it, it's doing something for somebody. So even if I don't understand something, I'm glad it's around.
Sure, sure. So at some point, I imagine you decide, like you said, your uncle bought you your first guitar, but you decide, well, shit, I want to start, playing music and writing songs and learning chords.
Yeah.
Talk about that transition, and 'cause, I mean, ultimately it led you to try and these two shows that I referred to in the opening. But were you playing in bands in high school? How did that work out?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It all started. My granny got me a karaoke machine when I was like 4,
Mm.
and she gave me a Johnny Cash karaoke CD, and that's really where it began. And then my great uncle, God rest his soul, he got like a PA system and would get all these tracks. So before I even played a guitar, I was like 8 or 9 and was doing music all the time. Started playing guitar, and pretty early on, like my family was very supportive, which was cool for me. Gave me a big boost in confidence. But yeah, I started. I mean, I was like 11 or 12 when I first started playing out. I would play like little fairs in town, any like restaurants that would have me. Um, my dad helped me, figure out how to do some of that stuff. But sadly, like there really wasn't that big of a scene in Dallas, Georgia, in terms of like music. And I didn't like go to school with other musicians apart from like band kids, and they didn't like me because I wasn't in band. And so it was just me and a guitar. I never had like a job in high school because fortunately I got to a point by the time I was in high school where I was playing like the 2 venues that would let me play regularly. And it gave, I would do those like 4 or 5 hour sets every weekend and do like 2 or 3 of them. So it was a lot of good experience, but I never got to really like cultivate a band,
Yeah.
at that growing up.
So at what point did you did the whole voice, it was the voice first before
Yeah.
so at what point did that come up and become an opportunity for you and you're like, I want to go do this?
Yeah. I think I was like 15, and, at that point I was like, all right, I'm 15. So I need to figure out how I'm going to be mega famous by 21. So
As we all do.
yeah, so I'm like, I'll be old by then. So I need to
Yeah.
figure this out now. And yeah, the voice thing, I had my dad. I've never gotten reached out to for anything. I've always done like the big cattle calls where I've had to wait in big lines. And yeah, my dad drove me to Atlanta. I forget exactly where it was, but did that whole process, ended up going through it, went out to LA for like however long it was, a month and a half or something. I had only been to like Georgia, Florida, and Alabama at that time. Um, so it was a weird experience. I mean, it was cool for me at the time. I thought I was about to be a megastar, as all those kids do. But yeah, me and my mom, who had also never been to California, in Los Angeles, it was a really good learning experience, and it was cool. I got to meet a lot of people that I still keep in contact with today. But ultimately, yeah, like that whole thing didn't work out. I went back home. It did help, like in terms of me getting booked around Georgia and stuff, 'cause they like to have a thing to point to, obviously. And then the idol thing just kind of came about because I was graduating high school, and like my grades were good, but I was just at a point that I think a lot of people are when they're 18, where they go, "What the hell am I doing with my life? What's next?" I could go to college, but I don't have anything I'm really interested in other than music. I had no connections, like no one that I knew that was in the music business or could give me any advice on what to do. So I think like my initial plan was just to kind of work for a year and try to move to Nashville and network organically. And my dad approached me because it was when Idol was coming back. They'd been off the air, and they, got obtained by ABC. They're coming back on a new network. And my dad's like, "Hey, I saw this on Facebook. Like, let's just go do it. At least it'll buy you some time. If it works out, you can figure things out over the summer." And went and stood in line again in Atlanta, this time outside in the middle of the summer in jeans, because if you're in country music, you have to wear jeans and boots.
Explain to people in those types of experience, whether it's The Voice or American Idol, because we see the packages of people waiting in line, but nobody really knows, unless you do it, how long you're actually waiting in line. Like, what is that? How long do you wait in line for those shows to actually get into that audition room?
God, it is. Well, it's funny because and I don't think I'm doing anything bad by giving this peek behind the curtain. It's not as if you wait in line to get in front of the judges. There's processes before all that. So I did the Atlanta audition, which are just in front of like producers, and so I waited in line for like 4 or 5 hours. Then you get to sing for like 30 seconds. So I started singing. I sang like half of a verse, and the guy goes, "All right, that's enough." And I was immediately pissed off. It's like, man, I stood in line. He's gonna cut me off after 2 lines. I gotta go home after this. Like, I'm sweating. It's gross. I hated it. And then he goes, handed me a slip of paper, and he goes, "Okay, you'll hear from us." I'm like, cool. Still not entirely sure what that means, but cool.
Yeah.
Then they reach out, and I forget some of the details exactly. It's been a minute now, but they were essentially like, you have to audition for the executive producers. And so I think it was like LA, New York, and New Orleans. And I was like, I guess New Orleans is the closest thing to me.
Yeah.
So we had scheduled a day to do it, and I was talking to the person helping me. And it's a bit of a drive from Dallas, Georgia to New Orleans. And I was playing a show the night before they were holding the auditions, and it was like some of the only decent money I was going to see that summer. So I was like, look, I want to do this, but I'm also not going to cancel this show. Can we do it at the end of the day? I'll go home, sleep a few hours, and drive. And they go, yeah, that's totally fine. I get done with that show that night, and I have like 3 missed calls. And I called the young lady back that was helping me, and she goes, "It's not going to be able to go as long as we think. We need you here before noon." So I finished the show and immediately got into the truck, and my dad went with me because he's the best. We drove through the night. I took there's a lot of unpolitically correct terms. I took a little bath in a truck stop, just with the sink, trying to get myself pretty. I was still wearing the show clothes. And I was tired. I was ill, like I just driven through the night. I knew I didn't like sound my best, look my best. I wasn't ready to like be my best. So I walked in to the executive producers, and that's pretty much exactly what I told them. I said, "Look, guys, if I want you to know this, so if you don't love me today, maybe you can give me a little grace. But like, here's what happened. I probably sounded like a whiny little kid. I was just like, here's how it went down." And they loved it. They thought it was so funny how I said everything. So then we ended up from then, like I sang for them. They said, "You'll hear back from us." We just start driving back to Georgia. Thank God they called me within like 30 minutes and said, like, "You're good. You're in. We want you. Where would you like to audition?" I forget all the cities, but the 2 closest to me were Savannah and Nashville, both like 4 hours from my home at the time. And went with Savannah just because I thought it would be maybe less country singers than Nashville. Thought that might give me a little leg up. And went the first day. Was supposed to go the first day, and they had so many people. And they approached me at the end of the day and said, "Hey, since you're local, we're just going to have you go tomorrow morning." I was like, "Well, I'm not exactly local. Like, if I drive home and then drive right back, I'll be on time." So we ended up staying in a beautiful, luxurious Ramada. It was incredible. Me and my parents, 1 change of clothes. But
This
then it really,
this
yeah,
message brought to you by Ramada Inn.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, Ramada needs to hit me up. That's where Star from. But yeah, and then so I walked into the main audition and kind of had the same story of like, I came through some adversity to be here.
Yeah.
And did the audition, and it all worked out. And then I went to Los Angeles by myself this time, 18 years old, and yeah, that's kind of how it all began.
And ultimately, you ended up being the runner-up on the show
Mm.
on that season. And runners up have actually fared pretty well. I mean, there's been some that have gone on to find some success, and clearly you were, one of those case studies, right?
That's yet to be determined, but still,
Work in progress.
but yeah, I had no intentions of like going far in that process. I
Yeah.
think my whole goal was just I will be around like-minded people, and
Mm.
maybe I'll be around some people who are looking to go to Nashville, or maybe I'll meet some people who can give me some advice or some guidance on what to do next. So it was all very surprising to me when it kept going on.
Was it heartbreaking because you went through all the auditions to get there with the different levels of producers? You go through the shows, the staging, the practices, and to come in second. I mean, I imagine there was a great sense of accomplishment, but when you're standing there and you hear someone else has won, was it also kind of heartbreaking for you?
No, honestly, no. It was I think like that whole process was so jarring for me. I'd never done anything like that. Never had, I mean, it was really a shock to the senses. And I mean, I was 18 and then freshly 19 during that whole process. And um, during the end of it, we're in front of the Disney castle with Mickey Mouse and we're doing all this stuff. And I'm just like, what is going on? So I never had a thing where I was like, this is my moment. I'm gonna win American Idol and I'm gonna be Carrie Underwood, but less hot. I never had that moment really. And like I'd gotten really close with everyone that was on the show. We had all became great friends. Um, I had the girl who won I was dating, and so like it was I kind of saw it coming too, like the top three um had two country artists, and and honestly, I was rooting for the young lady that ended up winning in the first place, because I was all in love. So it worked out really well from where I was at. I think like my kind of goal as things were going through is just like I want to get as much like TV time as possible, just so I can kind of optimize this whole experience as much as I can. And so I felt like it went perfect. I really didn't even have a degree of disappointment at all.
Yeah. And then, I mean, coming out of that, you had done the song Johnny Cash Heart, I believe,
Yeah.
uh, which got released after your performance, and that ended up actually charting on the country uh, digital song sales chart like the first week of release, right? So I mean, it
Yeah.
to your point earlier that you wanted to make some connections and find some additional benefits out of it beyond just thinking I'm going to win this thing.
Yeah.
That must have been one of them. That, I mean, it gives you some, clearly the show gives you some name recognition just being on it, but then
Mhm.
also just that impetus of working with producers, getting a song cut professionally that maybe, to the level that you couldn't have done for yourself back in Dallas, and having that thing being on the charts. I mean, that doesn't suck in any way.
No, it definitely doesn't suck. Yeah, it was a jarring experience. It was a crazy feeling to see my name on a chart, when just less than a year before I was just playing in like Mexican restaurants in my town. So yeah, it was wild.
Yeah, and I mean, since then, I know it's been you've released an EP and a handful of singles, but you've also gotten to work with Christian Bush as a producer, as a Grammy winner, and then someone that I really, really respect as an artist, as a and you worked with him as a producer, Brent Cobb,
Mm.
who's another Georgia guy and has just produced a shit ton of really, really good music. And a lot of people equate him with his cousin Dave Cobb, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, that being able to work with accomplished producers like that as a result, I'm sure on these singles you've been producing, um, must be gratifying to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and getting to work with Christian was incredible because his studio is actually in Atlanta. And at the time, I was still living at home, because that was sort of right after that process. It was before I even moved to Nashville. So that was a crazy feeling, getting to work with Christian. And getting to work with Brent was kind of extra special, just because it was a couple years after. And that came from me meeting Brent and writing with Brent and hitting it off with him. And it wasn't so much you're going to work with this kid off Idol. It was like he met me, heard the songs, and just liked them. Brent doesn't really watch TV. I don't know if he owns one, frankly. And so, that was an extra special thing. And especially, I mean, that was, at the end of 2020. So the whole world was upside down and everybody was freaking out, at me especially. So getting to work with Brent was really cool. I've been a fan of Brent Cobb for a long time. And that was the first project I'd ever recorded in Nashville. And getting to do that with him was an extra special thing for sure.
Yeah. So, and that brings us to, I mean, this is your first full-length record. First of all, you got to work with a producer whose name is Titanic. So, I mean, that's kind of a weird, cool benefit from all that. I mean, I've never even met someone named Titanic. So,
yeah,
but
the weird and cool are the key words.
Yeah. Southern Galactic's the new name of it. It is, so I've heard a couple songs off it. I think there's 3 that have dropped thus far. But it's very different. It's as I mentioned up front, it reminds me of kind of some of the creative stretches that we've seen from guys like Sturgill, Simpson, and Paul Cauthen over the last couple of years, that have taken them out of just kind of like the very traditional country route and brought in different genres of music to the record. Talk about this record and just the experience of writing, producing, and how you feel with the final products.
Yeah, so it all kind of started with the songs. I had a pretty tumultuous year or so, and kind of all began I mean, really this time last year. I had a lot of things going on personally, and was just kind of looking at my whole life and my career and everything else. And I knew it was kind of time to make a real leap and a real pursuit. It's something different and something I could be proud of. So I started writing these songs, and I mean, God, there's 12 songs on the record, 8 of which I had written before we kind of started making the album, that ended up making the cut. But the whole thing was kind of crazy, because Titanic Sinclair, real name Corey Mixter, he's he's produced so many things in like the pop world and in rock and in like indie rock and all those things. And I became a fan of him, I mean, about 10 years ago. I think I was like 14, 15. Loved his solo music, loved projects that he'd been a part of and stuff he had written. But none of it was country. But I just thought he was so cool. Like the way he would do visuals, the way he would write, and the way he produced, I thought it was really special. And I think it was 2021, he did his own solo project called Texas Dream, which is sort of about his life being in an insane place and him leaving LA, moving to Texas, like settling down. And I heard the songs, heard the record as a fan, and I just DM'd him on Instagram and just said, "Hey man, like I've been a fan for a long time, and it's really cool to see you doing like country music. Like I never knew you even appreciated this stuff. And so you got like steel guitar and all this like country instrumentation in your music. And it's really cool just as a fan." And so he'd hit me back, and he's like, "Hey man, like I really appreciate it. I kind of crept through your Instagram and listened to some of the stuff you put out. It's really cool. So I'm like glad that you're a fan, because I'm a fan back at you. I think it's really cool." And we ended up writing a bit just over Zoom and FaceTime and whatnot. And then by the time early in this year, I had these songs together, And I messaged him, and I did not think it would work out whatsoever, but just kind of, throwing it at the wall and seeing if it would stick. I just called him or messaged him and said, "Hey, I'm sure you're very busy. I'm sure I can't afford you, but I got these songs. I would love to see if you're interested. If not, I would love to know if you know somebody that you think could do something special with me on this." And I sent him the songs, and he called me a couple days later. And I don't think he minds me sharing this. He called me and he's like, "Look, man," he goes, I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to be at a place in my career where I don't have to do anything I don't want to do or anything that doesn't excite me. I've listened to these songs. I think they're really special. This excites me. I want to be a part of it. We will make it work. Like, we will figure it out. I will work with you. We'll get this done. Which blew my mind. I really didn't expect that to be the case. I mean, he's like Grammy nominated songwriter and produced all this stuff that I've been listening to a great portion of my life at this point. And so, yeah, we had written a couple songs for the album over like Zoom, had a lot of long conversations about what it should sound like. He's a guy, he's from Michigan, and grew up with country music around him, but it wasn't really like his first love. He started getting into production and stuff on the rock side of things, and then moved into pop and electronic and all this stuff. And kind of later in life, fell in love with country music, which I noticed was sort of my thing in reverse. I started with country, fell in love with country, and then sort of from there found all this weird stuff that I love. But we had some of the same references, all the same, like our opinions are pretty aligned and like what is good and what is not. So yeah, I flew down to Texas to make the album. I stayed with him in his own home, and it was one of the most easy processes in terms of songwriting and recording that I've ever experienced. And he's just so smart. Like, it's so clear. I felt like a child in that room. It was like he was trying to teach a 6-year-old calculus. I was just like, yeah, well, if that works, I like that. I don't know why I like that, but I like it.
Look, I'm just glad that I'm not the only artist that when you're hearing from producers and talking to producers, the first thing that goes through our minds is, can I afford this? Because we're about to go in the studio next month, and the first thing that pops into my head is all right, can I afford this? How many gigs do we have to play to pay this bill? And then especially when you're working with someone that is accomplished, that has real chops, that you can learn from throughout that process, it can be pretty magical. And it has some resonance to the teach a man to fish narrative, in that when you work with a great producer, you learn so much, and you can take on to the next experience you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure there were times, if he wasn't such a sweet person, I probably would have annoyed him so much. I quickly realized how outclassed I was, just being in that room. So I was just trying to be a sponge. I was just like, well, why are we doing it this way? And where did you learn to do it that way? And why is this way, in your opinion, better than other ways? And he was so gracious about, walking me through that, and not like patronizing me. And it was such a learning experience. I remember calling my parents, and just everything from the production and everything else, but also just like marketing and music, and how, like, he's like a creative director on top of being a producer. So he's like, oh yeah, with this, I'm picturing this vibe, this kind of thing. It looks like this. And it was just such a cool approach to making a record that I had never really experienced before.
Yeah, I always feel outclassed by people because they're wearing sleeves and I'm not. But that's me. So talking about the first single that dropped, Silverado, I thought it was interesting in that I heard you play it just you with a guitar. I think it's on your YouTube channel.
Mhm.
And it sounds like it's got elements of Western swing and traditional country in it. But then you take Titanic's production end on it, and that's where when I made the reference to Sturgill before, it becomes this whole other thing because there's synth elements around it, and it becomes a really dynamic and very diverse song, much more than I would have imagined when I first started to listen to some of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. That one we did that in Texas, just as we were recording, and it was so that one felt like a really special one because it just seemed like where our two points of views aligned the most. Because I remember we were tracking like vocals, and he had this track that he had already sent me, and it was just kind of like that bass line and like the drums, and I'm like, what are you thinking with this? Like, it's really cool, it's super groovy. I said, man, it kind of reminds me of like Miss You by the Stones, which is like one
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
coolest and sexiest songs ever. And so we were sitting there, and that's where I was like, man, it'd be so cool if we could find some kind of like you
Yep,
know.
yep, yep. No, exactly. Now that you say that, I think about the kind of that the melodic run vocally in that, and I was watching you in that video actually do that, and you're doing it just you, but that makes
Mhm.
a lot of sense. I see that connectivity between the two.
Yeah, yeah, he spit out that I was like, man, I've never done a song with like oohs or ahs or non-actual English
Yeah,
lyrics, you know? And yeah, it was super cool. We wrote that song in like under an hour. And he was playing everything, and I'm like, let me put some guitar down. And so I played that like intro. I was kind of ripping like Fire on the Mountain at Marshall
yeah,
Tuck.
yep, yep.
That was sort of my inspiration, was to kind of take that kind of like mountainy, borderline bluegrassy, flat picky thing and merge it with that funk thing that he had put underneath it.
Yeah. So, all right, I got to ask you this though. Since your old man has been, cheerleader number one in your life, and he feels like music died when Waylon Jennings left this earth. Had this the new record is so different from even the singles in your EP, which are far more traditional country. How does he? I'm curious how he's felt about it. I'm sure he's heard all of it. So how does he feel?
Oh, I was terrified to
Yeah.
show both of my parents, because my dad has a secret weird side that he doesn't really talk about. Like my dad also showed me like Violent Femmes and Lou Reed and stuff. Uh,
So he
and
likes he likes like 70s punk and
yeah,
early. Okay.
but he's got some of that in him. And the thing about my dad, and I think like he's kind of grown with it too, because my parents are both. Um, it's almost cheesy to tell everyone how great your parents are, but sincerely, like my parents are the best and the only reason I do anything, and the only reason I feel like I'm allowed to do anything.
Maybe you
Uh,
could tell Mike if you want to share this anecdote with my children any day, I would greatly appreciate it. So but
yeah,
keep going.
perfect. I'll let them know. But I value my parents' opinion more than anything. They're the best people I know, and but I think my dad. My point of that being, my dad kind of became a student of the game with me. So I
But
started.
his worldview evolved as yours was evolving.
Yeah, because he's like, all right, my son's gonna do this. I want to be like aware of everything. So I mean, I've shown my dad so much stuff. Like I got him super into Sierra Farrell and Sturgill and all that stuff. And so I think like a part of me thought, even if my dad doesn't love this, I think he's at a point where he'll appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was more scared to show like my mom, because some of this stuff is like a little sexy, and some of it's about alcohol, and a great portion of it is about or greatly inspired by like cannabis. Um, and so we left Texas. I went home before and after, so I flew out of Atlanta, and I left, And on my way back, from Texas, my parents picked me up from the airport, and I'm like, all right, I'm just going to play y'all what we have. So I said, look, these are the roughs. This isn't the final product, but this is like the idea. And so I nervously start playing the album, and I'm in the back seat. My parents are looking straight forward. I don't see their faces. And so I'm playing it, and I'm just like looking side to side, just trying to see like anything happening. And both of them just like turned around at me at a red light, just smiling. They were like, "This is so cool." They're like, "This is some of the coolest stuff we've heard." And no, my dad loves it, because I think like my intention was to still honor country music how I see it, and like the core of it, with like the songwriting and the production and everything else, while also trying to kind of push the boundaries a little bit, because I'm of the mind that everyone that I like idolize and hold in high regard kind of did that. They took where things were, but they pushed it forward, whether it's Waylon Jennings or Hank Jr. or whoever. They found their own vein in country music while still being definitively country. So that was my intention the whole time. So as soon as my dad gave it the stamp of approval, I wasn't worried about it anymore at all.
Yeah. I mean, and to your point, look, I love both Waylon and Hank Jr. But if you listen to anything that Hank Jr.'s done in the last 40 years, it's more blues than anything else. I mean, that man, you could tell, loves blues guitar, and he's
Yeah.
damn good at it too. He's really good at it.
Yeah, I don't think he gets enough credit. I've always really been interested in his story. Like his dad died.
Falling off a cliff.
Yeah, but well, even before then, like his dad died, and they immediately start dressing him up as his dad when he's a child. He's probably one of the first like child stars, and has to go through his whole like early career just kind of singing his dad's songs, and then he's making records that sound like his dad's records. Then he falls off a cliff and almost dies and has his whole face reconstructed. And then it seems like around that point he just takes his life into his own hands and just started not being Hank Williams Jr. and became Hank Williams Jr. And I always thought his story in particular is so cool, because I don't know if he even gets enough credit for like the pioneer he was. He's such a good songwriter, and taking the like southern rock and blues, fusing it with country. He was one of the first guys to do it, and in my opinion, one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I think the song "The Conversation" with him and Waylon, to me, it's one of the greatest songs in any genre. For me, at least, in the top 25 of any ever. It's a phenomenal song, and it's an interesting song too, because the story they're telling is about his dad, and people trying to ride on his coattails, on his dad's coattails, which he clearly wanted to emancipate himself from. To your point earlier, like when he, after his accident.
Yeah, well, even I think it predates his accident. I'm not a historian, but he has the song "Living Proof" that has always been one of my favorite country songs, and has inspired, like, shifted how I write completely, because it's such an honest. It feels like you're reading the dude's diary or something. It's such a like peek behind the curtain of his struggles with all that stuff, and like kind of being pigeonholed in that place. And to a much, much smaller degree, I think I felt a bit of that coming off of this like idol thing, where it's like I'm trying to do all this stuff, make all this music, and people already think they know me and what I should sound like. And to this day, there's people on Facebook that are just pissed off that I don't sound like I'm doing Keith Whitley covers anymore. It's like, I love Keith Whitley. I don't think I could make a career just singing covers of him. It's like, you're mad I don't sound like a YouTube clip? Like, you're not buying the albums. You're not coming to the shows. What am I supposed to do? They're pissed off I grew my hair out, It's like,
all right, I'm gonna get you out of here on this, man. And your publicist, who I adore, would kill me if I didn't ask you about this. But Country Star app. Tell me about the Country Star app.
yeah, so this record has already been so stupid. Like, people have received it so well. It kind of blows my mind. Like, frankly, I feel so lucky, but it's insane to see people already hearing this, listening to it, new listeners, and I owe like 90% of that to Country Star. So Country Star is a mobile game from the company Space Ape, who already have a wildly popular game called BeatStar. It's kind of like the Guitar Hero thing where you like press the button, but rather than it being on guitar, it's got more to do with like beats. So sometimes it's guitar, sometimes it's vocal, sometimes it's drum, whatever. And they had reached out and put one of my songs from Slot Machine Syndrome, I Must Be Right, into the game. And then, we had just finished this record. So we sent it over and said, hey, is any of this interesting to you? And they really dug it, and kind of doing the like space country thing, with Space Ape. Like they dug it and have been so helpful and generous and kind with helping me and helping, my music meet people that it hasn't before, and people know about me who haven't before. So I'm very, very blessed with that. But yeah, Country Star is genuinely a fun game. Like, they sent me the beta. It is addictive. It is habit forming. And yeah, I'm incredibly blessed to be a part of that. I mean, I got my songs next to like Tim McGraw and Lainey Wilson and like all these big hit, Dolly Parton, like, and then some me for some reason. But it's been so cool, and the amount of like messages I've got that are like, I've never heard of you, but I played your song on Country Star and I really like it. They were gracious and helped me with like a pre-save campaign. So before Silverado came out, people had a week of exclusivity to just play it on the game and an option to pre-save it, which has been so stupidly helpful. I have an event the weekend that the record comes out that'll be like my event, where people can play my songs and try to beat my score, which they can't because I'm the champ. I mean, I'm undisputed.
And it also should be noted that space apes are far more delicious than traditional Earth apes. So
Yeah.
that's, I mean, and they're lower in fat content. So that's really important.
Lower in fat content, higher in galactic goo.
Yes, yeah. Yes, exactly. All right, Caleb Hutchinson, thank you so much for being on the Loadout, man. This has been great. It's been great catching up with you. And man, here's wishing you all the best.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.